Hey guys, so 8.2's been out for a little while now, and I've really been procrastinating this, but it's time for me to make the all-in-one LE 8.2 PVE guide. So I'm kind of going to go over the stats and, well, maybe not the stats, because that's a little more to talk about, but the rotation and things like that a little more quickly this time, because most of it has not changed at all. And anyone who's seen my previous guides almost entirely at all this expansion will already know everything that I'm going to be saying there, so I'm going to go over it a little bit quickly. I'm still going to go over it because I know not everyone has already seen the other guides. I don't want to make everyone go watch some outdated guide to get information they need. But just keep in mind I will be doing it a little quicker. And we have essence to talk about, we have trinkets that are new, a lot of cool stuff in 8.2. But with that being said, let's get started. So first, let's talk about talents, and just to clarify, Stormwrath and Lava is up to date. There could definitely be more information on like essences and synergies and stuff, but obviously everyone's been very busy. But all the information that is there has been updated for 8.2, or has been cleared to be accurate right now. That includes like stats, rotation, talents, pretty much everything should be good to go. Many people have been asking about it because on the front page you don't see any posts since April, but that is just blog posts. The guide has been updated as of July 6th. So that being out of the way, looking at talents here, I kind of want to talk about how in Mythic Plus and in Raids, there are two separate talent builds that are both very good and can both be used very effectively in each. So first, let's talk about Raids, because that's kind of more what I think most people are probably going to be doing. So you have the normal build of Echo, Totem Mastery, whatever you want here, Mash of the Elements, whatever you want here, Ice Fury or Primal Elementalist, and then Stormkeeper. I consider Primal Elementalist and Ice Fury kind of be the part of the same build here, because they basically have the same things. It's just, if you're very comfortable in single targets, Ice Fury is technically a little bit better, but if you're wanting to be able to focus a little more on mechanics and you're maybe not super used to LE rotation, or just don't want to have to put that much attention into it, Primal Elementalist is also very good. And it could even be better if you have to multi-dot or do any AoE. That is the primary build. That is still the build we are going to be using for most content. And then the second build I will show you in-game. It's the one that if you watched my Zakul kill video, you will have seen. The second build looks more like this. Maybe even Earth and Rage, depending if you have Igneous Potential traits or not. If you have more than, I would say, 2 Igneous Potential traits, or 2 or more rather, you probably want to still go with Echo here, but if you're taking off the Igneous, you're going all in on this build, then Earth and Rage could be better. And then on Zakul in particular, I use Aftershock as well, which would be more of a dungeon build, but AoE is very important. If you're doing a single target, stick with Totem Mastery. And then the key to this build is also having Vision of Perfection Major. The minor does not matter as much, kind of just go with whatever the Sims say, whether that's Focusing Iris, World Vein if you have enough people with it, a Crucible of Flame if you have like rank 3, but Vision of Perfection, currently, it didn't used to do this, but now when Vision of Perfection spawns, it will cause your Eye of the Storm, whether your Storm Elemental or your Meteor with Fire Elemental, which is less relevant, to come back off cooldown if there was a downtime between the spawn. So like if you have it spawn, and then immediately, or let's say you use Storm Elemental and then have a Vision proc spawn, you're not going to get the cooldown back. But if you use Storm Elemental, after 30 seconds it goes away, and then another one spawns, it's coming back. So you can take advantage of this in like, on Zakul for example, we had a lot of AoE to do. And every time this thing spawned, I could use Eye of the Storm again. And this is now part of my Weak Aura package that when you use Storm LE, it'll come up. I'll probably include a screenshot in the video of the little icon that comes up when you can use Eye of the Storm, and Call Lighting is up too. So that's pretty handy if you want to get that in the description. But this build is really good for like a mix of single target and AoE, but it does suffer a lot if you have to move, so keep that in mind. And then the dungeon builds, it's actually this build again, being one of the major ones, but with Aftershock, and then whatever you want here again, depending on your other talents, or traits rather. And then the old typical build of whatever you got here is still Echo or Earth and Rage depending on your traits. I wouldn't really use this build anymore unless you had at least 2 Echo or 2 Igneous Potential though. Aftershock, Match of the Elements, Primal Elementalist, and Stormkeeper again. Then the traits for this one would look more like no Vision. I wouldn't use Vision in this build. I would use Focusing Iris Major, And then I've actually been using Lucid Dreams Miner, but Purification Protocol Miner is also quite good for dungeons here. So this talent section turned into more of a talent than essence section, but whatever, it works. I'll go a little more into essences later, but these are kind of the two major builds for dungeons and raids that you can use. And one more thing to note, I think I've been undervaluing Earthshield quite a bit. I've been using this on, I use it on Orgazoa, as you may have seen, and the healing was actually pretty relevant. And Earthshield also causes your title droplets if you have the Benthic gloves to proc, which is pretty relevant as well, because you're not only healing yourself with that, you're healing other people. It's a pretty small heal, but it is relevant in the end, especially on like things like Orgazoa, where a lot of healing has to happen. This will cause that to proc. It will not take away your damage because they don't share your proc rate. But yeah, I wanted to get that out of the way really quick too. So now let's talk about stats. Stat ratios are the same as before. However, we really advise that you sim even more so than before, because stat ratios do change with like Benthic Gear. They change with essences. Different essences have different stats, different builds have different stats, and we just don't have the computational power to give you ratios for every single one of these different combinations of items. So you can go with these ratios as before, and you will do pretty well. But if you want to really min-max, we definitely recommend you go to raid bots and sim top gear, or get your own stat weights frequently and update from there. But just in case you don't know what ratios are, you haven't heard of these before, ratios are basically a ratio of stats that you have instead of the typical stat weights. Stat weights show you how much DPS each stat gives you, but they're pretty flawed in the fact that they don't account for stats lost, and stats work together in ways that stat weights just simply can't show you. Stat ratios are more, if you have, your stats are a total of 100, for example. In the single target ratio, you would want 30 crit, 30 haste, 10 mastery, and 30 verse. Each stat has different benefits, and each stat can benefit the other stats in such a way that even if your stat weight, say crit, is number 1, having 100 crits and nothing in the other stats would be significantly worse than having 30, 30, 10, 30. So that is something to keep in mind, and that's what these ratios show you. And obviously you're going to have only 100 stats, but you can change this to be 1000. It's just 30% should be crits, 30% should be haste, and so on. That's what stat ratios are. Now on to the priority list, usually referred to as a rotation, but isn't actually a rotation, so we call it the priority list. Has not changed at all. The only thing would be you want to use your essences pretty much on cooldown, regardless of what you're using, unless you have an essence such as Focusing Iris. You'd want to use that on AoE, even if that requires saving it for a little while, but generally use on cooldown if you don't have something specific you're going to use it on. And then as far as your abilities go, keep Totem Mastery up at all times. Use your cooldowns on cooldown unless you have something specific you're going to save it for. Keep Flame Shock up at all times. If your Flame Shock is at 7 seconds or below, you can refresh it without losing any uptime. The pandemic window will take effect, and you will not overwrite a Flame Shock, for example. It won't be a waste of a global after 7 seconds. Stormkeeper on cooldown, unless you're going to be saving it for AoE in particular, or a certain burst phase or something. Earthquake on 2 or more targets. Lightning Bolt if you have Stormkeeper up. Specifically with Master of the Elements, if you can get it with Master of the Elements, you will want to do so. But if there's nothing else to cast and you only have Stormkeeper charges, just use them. Don't try like Frost Shock and wait for a Lava Burst or anything. That would not end up being worth it in the end. If you have Surge of Power, you do want to empower it with Surge of Power instead of Master of the Elements. Surge of Power is more beneficial, so you would want to Earth Shock into a Stormkeeper Lightning Bolt instead of a Lava Burst and then Lightning Bolt. It would be more damage there. Earth Shock would be next on the list. Now you don't always need to use Earth Shock right away. Like you can Lava Burst before Earth Shock. In fact, you should Lava Burst before Earth Shock if you are not about to overcap. If you're at 60 Maelstrom, you should Lava Burst and then Earth Shock. And specifically you want to empower your Earth Shock with Master of the Elements as well. If you want more details on the Ice Sphere rotation and Master of the Elements buffing, I will link a video in the description from the previous patch. And I will link it to the timestamp in which I go over the rotation very in-depth if you want to see that. I think it would really help you guys out. But to continue here, below Earthshock priority, it would be Frost Shock's priority of Master of the Elements buff with Empowered Ice Fury. Regular Frost Shock is not really worth using. and then Lava Burst just kind of on cooldown if you don't have anything more important to cast. And then another caveat with Earthshock is even without Master of the Elements Gaming, you don't necessarily want to use it right at 60 either way. Let's say you get to 60, you have no Lava Burst up, you would cast Lightning Bolt or Ice Fury or whatever else until you're closer to cap. If you're going to overcap, simply use it, but ideally you can kind of bide time by casting other spells until you get a Lava Burst up before you overcap, and then you can empower it with Master of the Elements. So that is something to keep in mind. If your Totem Mastery is about to expire, you have 9 seconds or less remaining, just drop it whenever you can. Higher priority would be to drop it if it's actually no longer up. You want to have that up at all times. There's no pandemic window on this. 9 seconds was kind of an arbitrary number. Technically, the lower would be the better, but if you don't have any Lava Burst or anything to use, you would want to use it. Better than wasting a Lava Burst by trying to use it later. And then if you have nothing else to do, you cast Lightning Bolt, and if you're moving and have nothing else to do, you would cast Frost Shock. So quickly to look at Master of the Elements here, in order to buff Master of the Elements, you want to cast Lava Burst before it, and then the priority of things you want to buff would be Earthquake with 2 or more targets, an empowered Lightning Bolt from Stormkeeper, Earth Shock, an empowered Frost Shock from Ice Fury, and then everything else kind of doesn't really matter. I wouldn't even bother trying to buff these at all. Area Rotation is a little simpler. You will be using Meteor, Eye of the Storm on as many targets as you can. You can only use 1 Meteor or Eye of the Storm per elemental use. So you can say this as long as you want, as long as you make sure your Eye of the Storm is within the Cold Lightning window. We definitely recommend you get a week or 2 to track this. Again, you want to keep Totem Mastery up as much uptime as possible. And then you want to use your cooldown to cooldown, typical Stormkeeper on cooldown on AoE as well. If there are 3 targets, we recommend you maintain Flame Shock on all 3 of them. Use Lava Surge procs between Earthquake casts. Attempt to get Master of the Elements up for every Earthquake. And if there are 4 targets, and they will be up for a very long time, you should also try to Flame Shock all of the targets and do the same as 3 targets. If the 4 targets will not be lasting that long, it is not worth trying to Flame Shock them, however. If you have 3 Igneous Potential, you actually do want to use Lava Burst Hardcast, not just Lava Surge procs on 3 targets. I don't think this is mentioned here on this part of the page right now, but that is something to keep in mind. If you don't have 3 Igneous Potential, you only want to use Lava Surge procs, and on 4 targets, you only want to use Lava Surge procs as well. Now, even on more than 4 targets, you should still Flame Shock 1 enemy if you have 3 Igneous Potential and Master of the Elements. Use that enemy to use Lava Surge procs to empower your Earthquakes. Do not hardcast Lava Burst in order to empower your Earthquakes. That is not actually worth doing after 4 targets, or even after 3 targets. But you still would want to keep 1 Flame Shock up and Lava Surge to do that. And then your filler is just going to be Chain Lightning instead of Lava Burst. Instead of Lightning Bolt. So the opener hasn't really changed much except for after Firelight, you should probably put your Essence in there if you have an unused Essence. Now, I'm still going to tell you what it is, because I know, again, not everyone has watched the previous videos, but it hasn't really changed much. I will be showing it as well. So at 4 seconds on the timer now, if you have an Essence that is on use, instead of 5 seconds, you will want to be using Stormkeeper. At 3, you will use Totem Mastery. At around 2, shortly after 2, you will begin casting Lava Burst. As soon as the timer is finished, you will Flame Shock after the Lava Burst is done in order to make a crit while it's in the air. You will then use your Elemental and your Essence, or you can Lightning Bolt first, but you can do that. You can do Lightning Bolt before or after. And after whichever series of events you chose to do there, you should Ice Fury, Lava Burst again, Earth Shock, and then kind of just continue on with the rotation being like the normal Ice Fury rotation. Probably after the Earth Shock, you will want to Lava Burst and then Lightning Bolt, because your Stormkeeper is going to expire soon. Sometimes you have to fit a Frost Shock in there, depending if you have Lust or not. But to kind of show that here, do a pull timer at 4 seconds with a Stormkeeper, and then I'm going to initiate the rest of my precast.
5,
so we're at 4 here. Totem Mastery,
2,
Potion, Lava Burst,
1.
Flame Shock, Earth Lily, Essence, Lightning Bolt, Ice Fury. I actually said that wrong earlier. I want to Earth Shock before the... never mind, I didn't say that wrong. I'm having trouble thinking while doing it. But as you saw there, use my cooldowns, Ice Fury, Lava Burst, Earth Shock to get the Maelstrom all gone. Kind of stop trying here. And then if you have Lava Burst up again, you will Lava Burst to get your Lightning Bolt out. For some reason I thought I said to Earth Shock, or to Lightning Bolt before the Earth Shock, which would have been wrong. But I didn't. I don't think I actually said that wrong. I'll check in post-recording. But that would be the opener. It's kind of intense. Another opener you can do is very similar to that, but a little less challenging, I guess. You don't have to do as many different button presses in a very short amount of time. You can simply delay the Ice Fury and do the Stormkeeper first. So you don't have to cast extra Ice Fury, you can just do Lava Burst, do your other stuff, Lightning Bolt, Lava Burst, Lightning Bolt, and then you can Ice Fury from there. You don't have to worry about getting this one out in that very short amount of time. So if you're not super comfortable, that could be a better opener for you for the beginning of your, or maybe not even the beginning, just if you don't want to have to focus super hard in the opener, you got something else going on, that's a little easier and very little damage lost. But this opener takes advantage of mastery of the elements as much as possible. That's kind of the main thing about it. So let's take a fairly brief look at traits, essences, trinkets, and even races. So traits first. Ignis Potential is far and away the best trait. You definitely want to have 3 of these. It's the one that increases your Lava Burst damage. If you don't have Ignis Potential, we can talk about the builds you play earlier, but those are not currently on Blood Mallets. I don't actually know the trait values for those. But playing Stormily devalues Ignis Potential significantly because you'd be using a lot less Lava Burst. Blightborn Infusion is pretty unrealistic to get, and Undulating Tides will end up not proccing anywhere near as much as it does in Simcraft because it will be healing you and then not being able to proc for 45 seconds. So I wouldn't really recommend Undulating Tides as much. It is kind of nice defensively, but it's not going to be a crazy damage increase, as it looks like it is. And then Blightborn Infusion is obviously very hard to get, but if you get that, it's very nice. Natural Harmony is the main one you're looking out for. You want pieces with Ignis Potential on them and Natural Harmony on them. And then if we go to Tier 2, Overwhelming Power, it would be the next best thing. Overwhelming Power is also very, very nice. So if you have all 3 of those things on one item, that is very, very powerful. And you definitely want those items. Swirling Sands and Treacherous Covenants are also pretty good. Treacherous Covenants will do a little less in practice because you're not always going to be above 90% health, but if you look at logs on most fights, you actually are above 90% health for 90% of the fight. Or 50% health, actually, so even better. But I remember looking at the uptime of this, it was actually very good. And then other things such as Lava Shock are not great on single target, but Lava Shock is very good if you're flame shocking multiple targets and attempting to do more damage to one target by flame shocking these targets. Think about fights like Queen's Court, where you can't really Earthquake because the mobs are too far apart, but you do have Flame Shock up in both of them. That's where Lava Shock would do significantly better, and would probably become the second best trait. So keep an eye out for Lava Shocks for certain fights. And then Loyal to the End is pretty bad, but if you have multiple people using it, it actually can be decent, so don't undervalue this too much, but it is definitely not a crazy good trait for Ellie as it is for other people. Then for Hectic Ad Cleave, I do recommend in Mythic Plus you do still keep Ignis Potential traits. I don't actually know where they're at here, but Ignis Potential is still so good on single target that I wouldn't actually drop them. And one other thing I want to mention is Tectonic Thunder is very good in dungeons, but the reason the 3rd trait sims so much better, like significantly better than other numbers of the trait, is because in the current action priority list on Simulation Craft, the 3rd one changes the APL to use Earthquake on single target because it actually does make Earthquake a more beneficial spell than Earthshock for one target, and that is making it so Earthquake is being pre-dropped on the Hectic Ad Cleave. So it's making this trait look a lot better than it actually would be. So keep that in mind. But you could expect this to be around 6,000, maybe a little higher, probably like 6,500 without that benefit. So it would still be a pretty good trait for Hectic Ad Cleave situations. But Natural Harmony, a little more versatile. It's really good on single target and on AoE. I'd probably go with this one if you have the option. And then, of course, as I said earlier, Ignis Potential, even though it's not super high here, it's down here, I would still keep that on if you have it. And then Swirling Sand, Treacherous Covenant, the other normal ones, Blightborn Infusion, things like that are still quite good. And of course, I'll have a link to this website in the description. Now moving on from essences, Azerite, let's talk about essences. So, Hectic Ad Cleave first. Blow the enemy is a little bit ahead, but Condensed Life Force is actually still keeping up. Purification Protocol a little bit behind. I think the only problem with this is Hectic Ad Cleave is just using the essences on cooldown and having different spawn rates, so Purification Protocol and Focusing Iris are going to be a little different. Like this one may line up with the one that cooldown with the ads perfectly, Iris may not. I think in reality Iris is a better AoE essence, so that is definitely something you want to keep in mind. But moving on to Patchwork, the more important one here. This Life Force rank 3 is by far and away the best trait you can have, or essence you can have. Definitely want to keep this on for almost every single boss, unless you're going with the Visions build. Unfortunately, I don't have Sims for the Visions build, how good that the traits would be there. This build is the typical Ice Fury build. But Crucible of Flame is the second best. And then if we look at, I think there's a way to do this. Take away this. Apply changes. So let's say you have Condensed Life Force on. What miner do you want? Ideally you have World Vein if you can stack up with it, but that's usually not the case. Crucible of Flame miner is the next go-to, and then some close ones are Conflict of Strife and Focusing Iris miner. So any of these would be good options. Keep an eye out for any of these, and then AoE Protocol is pretty good, as you can see here. I think World Vein is kind of a trap, unless you have people actually using it. A lot of specs won't use it, so you may end up just not getting much benefit out of it, so avoid that unless you are sure people are going to be using it. So lastly, let's talk about trinkets. So we're on Patchwork here. Leviathan Lure and Shiver Venom Relic are both very good trinkets, and they come from the first two bosses in Eternal Palace, so that's super convenient, especially because the first boss also has excellent shoulders, and the second boss also has an excellent weapon. These are great bosses to come in on, great bosses to bonus roll. Definitely try to get these trinkets. This trinket's kind of a trap, don't really go for that one. These trinkets are also not bad, but they're somewhat trapped because they don't really do anything on AoE or anything like that. Highborn Compendium is very underrated because you see here, it can only be 400 eye level. That's 2600 DPS. Here you see 3600. That sounds crazy, but that's for 445. If you have this at 400, that's actually significantly worse. You can have this at 415. It's not significantly, but it's a little bit worse than the Highborn Compendium of Storms. So don't sleep on this thing. This thing is actually really good. It's even better when you're multi-dotting. I'm actually using this on Mythic Ajara right now, because it's my second best trinket behind my Shiver Venom Relic. So it's also super cheap. So if you're like relatively new, don't have a crazy amounts of gear right now, definitely look into buying this thing. It's usually around 7,000 or 8,000 gold. Font of Power, it's alright, but you can kind of look at this yourself. Main things you want to look out for are the first two bosses trinkets. I almost forgot, but the last thing we want to look at here is races. And as you can see, they're almost all identical, so honestly, if you have a certain race that you really like the animations of or something, then definitely by all means play that race, because you're really not going to see much of a difference. Now technically, if you're going for mythic rating and you want to really min-max your damage, Dwarf and Tauren have the same ratio of increasing critical strike damage, which makes them very good races for LA Shaman with the amount of crits we do. Pandaren, because secondary stat foods are so good right now. Timeout and Tauren for the versatility. Not sure exactly what everything else has, but everything is within like 400, which is a pretty small number. So, you know, kind of play what you want, but if you really want to min-max, then go for Dwarf or Tauren, or maybe even Pandaren if you really don't like one of those. I don't actually know how long this video is at this point. I think I've been talking for like 45 minutes or something. So, who knows? But there's going to be timestamps in the description anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But the last thing I thought of that I do want to talk about with you guys is Benthic Gear. It's a very popular topic of discussion lately. Benthic Gear is really powerful, especially for its eye level, and it's not super hard to get. You have to farm mana pearls in Nazjatar, which pretty much comes down to doing dailies and doing world quests. And a very important thing to note is you can farm pearls on your other characters, buy Benthic armor, and send it to your main in order to try to get a socketed piece, like I did for way too long. I spent like 1,000 pearls. But the pieces that you're going to want in order of importance is the Akana's Reefstrider Treads, which increases your critical strike damage by 2%, maybe 3%, I think it's 3% in Eternal Palace and Nazjatar. This is really good and will perform better than any piece you can get other than this piece. you could get a 455 socketed piece with perfect stats on it, and this would do better than that piece if you have it at 425. Even 420. I have mine at 420 because I didn't have enough pearls to upgrade them all to 425 yet. Because the 425 upgrade is by far the most expensive upgrade. The next best one is the bracers, or Untitled bracers. They have a damage proc on them. Very powerful as well. Probably better than anything you're going to get with. If it has a socket on it, it's better than anything you're going to get in the Mythic Eternal Palace as well. And the next best one is the gloves, Pone's Deep Sea Hand Grips. Another proc that can also heal. I think I mentioned this earlier with Earth Shield. If you have Earth Shield on you, each tick of Earth Shield can cause this to proc, and it will heal random friendly targets. And the healing proc does not interfere with the damage proc, and vice versa, so it's strictly just beneficial to have that. Damage proc is pretty powerful as well. Go back to one of my longer Azara pulls here. You can see that, you can't see the crit damage one, but I made my Love Burst do 3% more damage, and all my crits do 3% more damage. And then the Frost Blast is the bracers, 1.2% of my damage was that, and 1% of my damage was my Tidal Droplets. And then if you go to my healing, you can see that I had about 144k healing from that thing, which isn't a crazy amount, but it is definitely relevant. So that is the Benthic armor situation. The rest, there are some other good ones, like the belt here. The Aberration Damage Belt. Really good if you're looking into doing like Orgzoa or Zakul in particular. Those are both Aberration bosses with Aberration adds. So you'll just instantly do 2% or 3% more damage on that boss by having this belt. So on those particular bosses, this belt is really good. But everywhere else, this belt is useless. And then I believe there's one other belt that had like a physical damage proc on it that's pretty good. And then there's also bracers that cause the pufferfish to explode. That could be pretty good too. A little better at AoE. But if you had to pick a bracers, you'd probably want this one. Because the AoE doesn't work in like dungeons or anything, only raids. And there's not really any fights that have important AoE on it other than Zakul, and that one you can do pretty good AoE on that one by playing Storm Alley. But that is the summary of the Benthic Gear. Hopefully that answered some of the questions I've been seeing. A lot of people wonder about them Benthic Gears. Alright guys, that's about it for me for 8.2 LE Guide. Hopefully all your questions have been answered, and hopefully this video isn't like an hour long. Don't want super long videos, it's a little intimidating. But I will have timestamps in the description to each topic. And I really appreciate you guys for watching the whole thing if you're at this point. I do want to mention that I've been streaming almost every day on my Twitch channel. If you want to see me progress on Azara or whatever I'm doing at the time, check that out in the description below. And hopefully I'll see you guys there at some point. But otherwise, I'm also going to be working on an Eternal Palace LE Shaman guide pretty soon, if not like by the time this video is already out, so maybe I'll already have it recorded by then. But that's it for me for today. Thanks for watching, guys. Like and subscribe or whatever else, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.